I wanted also to make it clear that I share something in common with all of you, and that is a commitment for lifelong learning. And nothing that I say tonight should in any way negate the importance of lifelong learning, of keeping up to date. I think we all recognize that as the years pass, we forget things. We remember, or we recognize that there are things we haven't learned. And there are new things that come out. And we have to keep up, and we have to present to our patients the very best information. And if we ever forget how important lifelong learning is, we've forgotten one of the basic ethical principles of the profession. I also wanted to compliment the ECP and the AMA. As Rich brought up, they were there at the beginning. They put the ABIM together. And for 50 years, the ABIM had it right, and I think the ABIM should be recognized for all of the good work they did from 1936, I believe it was when they were formed, until the mid to late 1980s. As I say, 50 years, a lot of docs put in a lot of work and did some great work and served the profession very well. I would say that starting in the late 1980s, the ABIM slowly began to go off track for a number of reasons, and I want to get into that a little bit with you right now. And I wanted to point out some reasons why, in my opinion, I think maintenance of certification is not working. Again, many of you know, but just so we're all on the same page, there are now 200,000 ABIM board certified physicians in the United States. As you all know, the ABIM is headquartered here, and as I think Rich alluded to, the ABIM certifies not only internists, but all of the medical subspecialties, and by my count, I think there are 21 medical subspecialties that are also involved. ABIM has pointed out that 200,000 represents about 25% of the physicians in the United States. So we're dealing with a very broad population of docs across the country. I wanted to touch on 4 areas tonight. I'll try and go fast. I wanted to begin with governance and make some points. Let me first raise the question with you whether or not the ABIM governance is in touch with the rank and file. Rich touched on this a little bit. Here are the members of the Board of Trustees of the ABIM. Their names are not all that important, but if you shift over and see what their day jobs are, you can see that they are chairs of departments of medicine at major universities, deans of medical schools. In one case, the EVP of the entire University of Virginia health system, Rick Shannon. Some of you may know Rick. He was here in Philadelphia for many years. There is only one doctor who's really involved in any kind of day-to-day clinical practice, and that's Chris Sinski. And for the last several years, Chris has been working part-time for the American Medical Association. She formerly was working 30%. She's now moved that up, I just learned, to about 80% of her time. Of course, there are 2 public members on the board. Underneath the board is the ABIM Council. Rich made some reference to the council, and the council, as Rich also referenced, is in charge with overseeing certification and also MOC, and this language is taken right from the ABIM website. There are, by my count, 19 council members. Maybe I'm off one. And as I look through their CVs, they are all deans or professors of medicine at major universities, except for one, Leslie Meng, who has been in transition related to the Katrina episode several years ago. So between the board and the ABIM Council, there are 29 physicians by my count, and only 2 are regularly seeing patients, like all of you in the room today, with true clinical responsibilities that are dealing with electronic health records with meaningful use, that have to track down patients, renew prescriptions. Sure, Rick Shannon maybe goes to medical clinic, David Johnson goes to medical clinic once a week or once a month, and all of the students and residents clamor around him. But you'll see that the board and the council is really not involved with day-to-day medical care, at least not in my view. There are more public members, non-physicians, than there are doctors in active clinical practice on the board and the council. And there may not be a single doctor in private practice on the ABIM board or council. And the ABIM talks about their responsibility of representing the profession. And I take issue with that this is not representative of the profession. The ABIM has put together a task force, and they have the task force has its own website. It's called Assessment 2020. Harlan Krumholtz is the chair of the task force. He's also a board member. And the stated goal of the task force is to work and help improve maintenance of certification, as stated here. And they've put together what they consider a wide variety of public figures and physicians who are important stakeholders. But when you look at the list of the folks on the task force, it largely recreates the same group that are on the ABIM board and council. And you go down the list, Harlan Krumholtz is part of the ABIM board. There's Rich. Lee Berkowitz is the board. David Coleman is the board. David Johnson is the board. Rebecca Lipner works for the ABIM. So to get new ideas into the ABIM, you won't see it through Assessment 2020. You're just going to see more of the same people, more of the same ideas. Now, there are 4 names here that are not even doctors. And Marilyn Mann is a lawyer. And if you want to see anybody who's confused about certification, Marilyn Mann has her own blog through Assessment 2020. If you haven't looked at it, she really is confused about what it's like to be a doctor. She has a lot of comparisons to being a lawyer, which don't really fit. And I think she and some of these other folks just don't give the ABIM the diverse information that they're really seeking with Assessment 2020. As I see it, not everyone on the list can be seen on this slide. I didn't scroll down. There are a couple other names. But I can tell you, as I looked at the list, there's only one person who possibly sees patients on a regular basis. I believe it's Ted Eiton, who is a medical director at Kaiser. Now, if you're a medical director at Kaiser, a lot of your time is going to be in administration, and he's the best example there. You'll also notice that Zeke Emanuel is on the list. Now, Zeke is an internist. He trained up in Boston. I believe Steve was his attending. He trained in oncology. And the ABIM asked him to help with Assessment 2020 and maintenance of certification. Now, how many in this room think that Zeke participates in maintenance of certification? I don't see any hands. No one thinks that Zeke would participate in maintenance of certification, but the ABIM wants him to oversee maintenance of certification. How many think that Zeke is certified? He's an internist. He's an oncologist. There are 200,000 certified internists by the ABIM. Here's the ABIM website. Zeke's not even certified. The ABIM is not trying to represent, in my view, the profession. They're trying to just replicate the folks on the board. We hear a lot about the expense of MOC, and the ABIM will tell you, and Rich showed you some slides, that it's affordable. In fact, here's a quote from an ABIM board member. "We do recognize there's a cost for the large majority of our physicians. The entire program costs from $200 to $400 a year." Let me walk you through this, folks. You have to register for the ABIM. Rich talked about it's $195 for internal medicine. I believe it's about $250 for the medical specialties, give or take a couple bucks. You have to get 20 points a year. You have to pay for the points in most cases. There are ways to avoid the cost, but most doctors go to a SEP module. In Pennsylvania, we put on 6 SEP modules a year. Darylyn will tell you she was in charge of it. We charge a little bit less than $100. But I look next month, one of the ACP chapters is charging $125 for one SEP module, 10 points. I've lowballed it here in my view, $100 a year. You're going to spend $800 to $1,000 a year for the SEP modules. But even if they're $50, even if they're $25, you're going to be out of the office for a full day getting the 20 points. You're going to lose office revenue, and the office is still going to run. You've got to pay the secretaries, you've got to pay for the heat, the utilities. Many people will take some sort of exam prep course. I looked just recently, the ACC is charging $900 for a 3-day course to prepare for the exam. If you do that, you're going to spend a lot of money for the course, but you're going to lose even more money not being in the office for 2 or 3 days, and again, paying for the office revenue. The day of the exam, you're going to you may have to travel. If you live in Philadelphia, well, you won't have to travel too far, but a lot of folks don't live in Philly, and they have to drive, they have to stay overnight, they have to pay for room and board. Again, you're out of the office for 8 hours taking the test. You're going to lose income, maybe $1,000, maybe $1,500, maybe you make $2,000 or $3,000 a day, and you're still going to pay for office overhead. You have to do 2 patient improvement modules, I believe 1 every 5 years. You're going to do surveys. To get 25 surveys, folks, you're going to have to send out a couple hundred surveys. That's 49 cents for each stamp. You got to put another 49 cents to get the survey back. It's $1 for every one that you send out. You're going to do a lot of chart review. Your staff is going to go through this. $200 to $400 doesn't cut it. A fair number, I believe, and possibly a low one, is about $10,000 over 10 years. You're probably going to spend about $1,000 a year for maintenance of certification. The $200 to $400, I disagree with. And in fact, there's a recent letter that was written to the ABIM by the Academy of Sleep Medicine. And they said the MOC program fees of the ABIM are among the highest of any of the ABMS boards, especially for individuals with subspecialty certifications. I spent the time here to show you the board is out of touch. They don't write any checks. If they're out of the office, they don't lose any income. They're all employed docs. They're at the top of their field. No one even knows if they're gone. Let me talk a little bit about stewardship. And I would say the ABIM, to me, and this is my personal opinion, appears to spend lavishly on themselves. This is Chris Castle. She had the job before Rich. She was president of the ABIM for about 10 years. In 2011, she was paid $590,000. It's a fair salary for what she did. She also worked for the ABIM Foundation. She got almost another $200,000. At the same time, she was working for the Kaiser Health Plan Foundation. The board of the ABIM didn't even know about it. I asked David Johnson about it, who was chair of the board of the ABIM. First he said, well, we paid Chris for the job, not for the hours. Then he thought about it, he realized that was a bad answer. And he said, well, we didn't know about it. And if we had known about it, we wouldn't have allowed it. But it happened under David Johnson. At the same time, she was working for a private organization called Premier Inc. It was reported by ProPublica in 2012 that they paid her $235,000 because it's a private organization. We don't know what she was paid in 2011, although she was on the board from 2008 on. She probably was paid somewhere in this range. $1.2 million. It's not a bad salary. And the board didn't even know what was going on. And it's possible she had other jobs. The board just didn't know. Okay, I don't expect anyone other than Rich or maybe Steve to recognize this person. It's Lynn Langdon. She's not a doctor. She has a master's degree. She served as assistant to the ABIM president. She went to Dickinson College. It's not a bad school. It's not Harvard, but it's not a bad school. She got a master's degree in education. She didn't get an MD. She didn't take the MCATs. She never took a high-stakes exam. Her salary in 2011 was $313,000. In my judgment, that is probably twice what the average internist in this city is earning. She was paid an additional $78,000 in benefits, and she got a bonus of $298,000. She was paid almost $700,000 to be the assistant to the ABIM president. Scott wants that job. And the ABIM is not alone in this kind of wild spending. If you look here at the top 10 ABMS board member salaries in red, and in blue, the corresponding subspecialty average salaries for the physicians in those subspecialties, you'll see that the folks at the top are being paid 2, 3, 4, and 5 times the average salary of the docs that they represent. Now, thank goodness the ABIM gave up the Four Seasons Hotel. But for years, this is where they stayed when the board came to town. I thought they gave it up, but then I found out they were back there last June for another meeting. I think they have largely given it up, but I have to point out to you that the ABIM building is on the east side of the city on Walnut Street. The Four Seasons is on the west side of the city. You couldn't pick a hotel that's further away, but you couldn't pick one that's cheaper either. It's the most expensive hotel in the city, other than maybe the Rittenhouse. There are no fewer than 6 hotels within walking distance of the ABIM building. There are probably another 24 that are just a very short cab ride away. This is Washington Square. Some of you may recognize that tall white building there. I'll show you a shot of it a little closer up. It's on the west side. Here it is from street level. It's a condominium. If you live there or own a unit, you get a doorman. You also get a chauffeur-driven limousine. There it is. I think that's a Mercedes-Benz. I don't own a Mercedes, but I'll bet that costs $100,000, that car. A lot of gold in this place. Here are the doors. Here's the units. They look pretty nice to me. Wood floors and great windows, great kitchen. It's called the Air Condominium. It was converted from an office building in 2007 into a condo. At the time, a real estate agent told me that it was the most expensive, maybe he was wrong, maybe it was one of the most expensive residential per square foot real estate listings in the city. The public record shows that the ABIM Foundation bought a unit at the end of the year of 2007. You'll also remember that the real estate market hit a bubble in early 2008. Again, public record, the purchase price was $2.3 million for the condo. The city of Philadelphia does something interesting. They don't assess real estate holdings anymore and then come up with a percent of taxes. They list a market value for every piece of real estate in the city. Now, we can argue that the city is wrong, they're right, they're probably close, but they may not be perfect. But they list in 2014 the current market value of that property at $1.43 million. So you do the math, there's a paper loss there of $870,000. If you look at the 990s of the ABIM Foundation, they're paying $160,000 plus or minus a year, probably on debt service and upkeep, and I guess gas for the limousine. The Hopkinson house is across the street. Some of you know it. I was curious what a 3-bedroom cost at the Hopkinson house, because that's what the ABIM has at the Air. But a 2-bedroom at the Hopkinson house, a pretty nice place. It's got a pool, 2-bath. It's $2,500 a month, $30,000 a year. Now, so a 3-bedroom is $35,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year. You could get the same size unit across the street. You don't have to spend $162,000 a year unless you want to spend it on yourself. I want to share something with you. The AMA has a foundation. They have 22 volunteer board members, and no one gets paid. Steve PAMED is here. Steve was on that board. The AMA 990 lists Steve as spending 10 hours a week volunteering his time, no payment, to the ABIM Foundation. He did it for a number of years. And all 21 other board members do the same thing. That's a lot of time, folks, 10 hours a week. The Pennsylvania Medical Society has a foundation. They have 12 volunteer members. No one gets paid except the executive director. The sister organization of the ABIM, the ABFM, has a foundation. They have 6 volunteer board members. No one gets paid. They don't even have an executive director that gets paid. At the ABIM Foundation, everybody gets paid. They have 14 board members. Many of them transition. You've been on the ABIM board, you've been chair, you move over and you're on the ABIM Foundation and you pick up a little bit more money. Now, it's perfectly legal. The IRS isn't going to come in here and criticize them. The auditors aren't going to. You can pay them whatever you want, but I'm trying to show you a culture that exists at the ABIM Foundation. A culture of luxury, of spending on themselves, and missing the point that this is not their money. This is the money of the diplomats. And to spend it wildly is irresponsible, in my view. Salaries on the 990 for the ABIM Foundation represent 61% of their expenses. The AMA Foundation does fundraising. Now you can have a foundation, you don't have to do fundraising, but the AMA Foundation raised $1.5 million in 2011. The Pennsylvania Medical Society raised $1.2 million. Again, the sister organization of the ABIM raises anywhere from $3 to $6 million a year. The ABIM, legal, totally legal, doesn't raise a penny, according to their 990 on 2010 and 2011. But what they do is they paid the COO $333,000. They paid the executive director $500,000, and there's no job there. All you do is write checks. You pay bills. The judgment here just strikes me as wrong. So I looked up stewardship, and what's the definition? The careful and responsible management of something entrusted to one's care. Luxury condos, limousine, the high salaries. I didn't get into the retreats. They're going on. Speculative investing, buying single real estate. The appearance, simply the appearance that the foundation is passing money around to folks just strikes me as wrong. And I raise the question, is this good stewardship? And then finally, I want to talk about the medical knowledge and the secure exam on MOC. There's a lot more here, but I don't want to take all of the time. So part two, as Rich alluded to, is the medical knowledge point. Prior to 2014, you needed 100 points over 10 years. All of a sudden, you need 100 points over 5 years, 200 points over 10 years. I don't know if the body bags were piling up. Rich can talk about that. But one of the consequences of doubling the points is that it raises the income to the ABIM, because they sell the SET modules, the license, to the different chapters to put on programs. And the SET modules are about $250. The Pennsylvania chapter used to put on 2. Darrell sponsored them each year, and it cost the Pennsylvania chapter $500. Well, now that we need more points, we're putting on 6. So instead of paying the ABIM $500, we're paying them $1,500. And there are a lot of state chapters that are doing the same. So you can keep raising the points. And I don't think Rich or anybody on the board sat home and thought, gee, I can really squeeze folks here. But the more you raise the points without making a case that we need to raise the points, the more income it is for the ABIM. And it just looks odd. It doesn't look right in my judgment. I want to finally talk about the secure exam. It's a very high stakes exam, as you all know. And many of you in the room are familiar with this slide, but I want to talk about the recertifiers, the folks that took the test 10 years out or maybe 20 years out. This graph may be a little hard to figure out, but if you look on the vertical axis, this is the pass rate from the low 70s to the high 90s. And if you look at the horizontal axis, this is the years from 2008 to 2013. Starting in 2008, the pass rate was 92%. The next year, it was 90%. 2010, it was 88%, and it's gone downhill over the last 6 years until last year it was 78%. Do the math again. That means 22% of the folks who took the test failed. Now, let me just walk you through the numbers here. I believe there were 5,700 test takers in 2013, 22% failed. That's 1,270 doctors that have now failed the exam. The consequences are sort of obvious to all of us. You could lose your hospital privileges, your credentialing at a health insurance company. A lot of folks are employed, and a lot of employers say a part of the job is being certified. If you're not certified, you could lose your job. We've exposed those 1,200 doctors to bottom feeders like this guy, and no one's going to stand up for those 1,200 doctors. They're not bad doctors, and they're not proud of failing the exam. So they're a silent majority, and I think we have to represent them fairly. So what can be said in conclusion about the ABIM? I think there's been a failure to include the profession in decisions. Despite repetitive statements by the ABIM that they represent the profession, and their business model to me just doesn't seem to be the profession self-regulating itself. There's the appearance of lavish spending, speculative real estate investing, significant losses, and there's not accountability. These are decisions that the board made, and the board seems to say, well, we won't make that mistake again, but we don't know how many other bad decisions they've made, and there really has to be accountability in this situation, in my view. The foundation, you all may know, you should know, was funded by the diplomats. And what exactly is our return on investment for millions of dollars being taken from the diplomats to the foundation? I think there's an insensitivity by the board about the expense of MOC, and certainly about the time constraints that are involved. There's a high percentage of failures on the recertification exam. I know Rich will respond to that, but what's important here is that the medical students and the residents have seen this for the last 6 years. And it is almost incomprehensible to me that all of these deans and chairs of medical schools spend their day talking about how important primary care is and encouraging medical students and residents to stay in primary care. And yet, by failing all of these diplomats, they send a message that becoming a primary care doc is a huge mistake. Why would you expose yourself 10 years into practice to no longer being certified, to losing your job? It is a really bad message. And let's be honest, 22% of internists are not deficient. I think there's a basic failure of the board to consider the experience of physicians in the community. And MOC, as you know, is deemed as burdensome and unhelpful to most practicing physicians, and it doesn't have to be that way. And then finally, tens of thousands of physicians are disappointed, angry, and turned off by the ABIM. My last slide is some options that I think all of you should consider. We have to decide if the profession has confidence in the ABIM board. And if we don't, is there a way we can overhaul the board? Can we establish a system where a high percentage of the board members have true clinical responsibility, and put some limits on administrative physicians on the board? Can we create more transparency in spending so that we understand better about the salaries, the conferences, the retreats, the condominium use, and a number of other expenses? Would it be possible to have an oversight committee that would look at board appointments and council appointments? Because what they're doing right now is really self-replicating themselves, and we need more diversity. And to me, it seems like there's an incredible bureaucracy at the ABIM that should be explored, and maybe it could be made smaller. And if the ABIM board won't change, then the profession has to look, in my judgment, at a new certification process deemed by the AMA and other professional specialties.